On a quiet Christmas morning, Emma, a young woman with a kind heart and natural urge to help others, noticed a lonely, elderly man sitting in sorrow. Hoping to lift his spirits, she bought him small gifts and treats, thinking it was just a simple act of kindness. But an hour later, her peaceful day was interrupted by a knock at the door. Standing outside were a group of lawyers bringing unexpected news, something connected to her kindness that would change her Christmas in ways she never could have imagined. On Christmas morning, Emma knelt in a quiet corner of the church, whispering a silent prayer. She prayed earnestly for kindness and peace to fill the world and for strength to handle her daily struggles. As her prayer ended, she stood up and adjusted her coat. Quiet smile spread across her face, and her eyes lit up with excitement for the day ahead. This Christmas, Emma had saved just enough for a special meal at her favorite Italian restaurant, a small luxury she hadn't indulged in for months. To most people, it might seem like an ordinary thing, but for Emma, it was truly special. Cravings for her favorite pasta filled her with excitement as she thought about the small sacrifices she made to save enough, cutting back on coffee, skipping snacks, and stretching every penny. Now she could finally treat herself to a moment of comfort and joy, a small celebration to help her forget her struggles, even if just for a little while. With those thoughts, Emma began walking toward the church's exit. But as she passed a quieter corner, her steps slowed. There, sitting alone on a bench away from the bustling crowd, was an elderly man. At first, she assumed he was simply resting, but as she walked closer, she noticed his slumped shoulders and his face lowered to the ground. Quiet tears were falling onto the dry floor beneath him. Her heart sank. Her excitement and cravings faded as concern took over. Something was clearly not right. She hesitated briefly, unsure if she should approach, but then decided to step forward. "Excuse me, are you okay?" she said softly, careful not to startle him. The elderly man looked up, startled by her presence. He quickly wiped his cheeks, trying to compose himself. For a moment he said nothing, his lips pressing into a thin line. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. "It's nothing really. Just memories," he said weakly, forcing a small smile that failed to hide his sadness. Emma sat down beside him, giving him enough space to feel comfortable, but showing she was willing to listen. "Sometimes sharing what's on your mind can make it feel a little lighter," she said softly. "I'm here if you feel like talking." The man glanced at her, then nodded. "I hope to spend Christmas with my family," he said softly. "I went to see my son and meet my grandson, but they turned me away, said they had other plans." His voice cracked and he paused, taking a shaky breath. "I was so excited to see them, to be part of their lives again, even if just for a day, but they didn't want me there. Now here I am, spending Christmas alone. I don't even know why I came to the church. Maybe to feel less lonely." Emma's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "No one should feel this way, especially today." Her voice filled with compassion. The man nodded weakly, wiping his eyes with a trembling hand. She stayed by his side, and after a moment of silence, she looked down at her purse. Almost instinctively, she touched it, as though making a decision. An idea sparked in her mind. Though her plans for the day had centered around her own small celebration, she realized there was something far more important she could do. The elderly man needed kindness and connection more than she needed that meal. In that moment, she decided she wouldn't let him spend Christmas alone. She stood up and told him softly, "Wait here. I'll be back in just a moment." The man nodded, though his expression remained uncertain. Emma walked toward the church's exit, her steps steady with purpose. As the elder man watched her leave, his shoulders sagged, and a quiet sadness crept back over him. For a moment, he thought she might not return, and the familiar weight of loneliness began to settle in once again. But Emma had no intention of leaving him behind. She stepped into a nearby shop determined to bring a little joy to the elderly man. She picked it up, and after a moment of thought, wrote a short message inside, something simple yet hopeful. Her words were meant to remind the man that he wasn't alone this Christmas, and to bring him a small glimmer of happiness. At the billing counter, Emma began counting her money and realized that the little she had saved for her special meal was now spent on these items. But she didn't hesitate. She remembered the prayer she had whispered in the church and knew in her heart that making the elderly man smile even for a moment was more meaningful than any meal she could have. This act of kindness was her true joy. After paying the $50 bill, Emma stepped out of the shop and walked back toward the church, her heart filled with quiet purpose. She clutched the small bag of offerings tightly, hoping they would brighten the lonely man's Christmas. As she came near the bench, she saw the elderly man still sitting quietly, his head lowered in thought. Before approaching, she cleared her throat gently and extended the warm cup of coffee toward him. "Here," she said softly, "this is for you." The man looked up, startled by her presence. For a moment, his tired eyes widened in disbelief as they landed on the cup. "You came back?" he whispered, his voice unsteady. He hesitated, glancing at her face as if to confirm her intention, then with trembling hands he accepted it. "I thank you. Thank you so much," he murmured. Emma placed the pastry and Christmas card beside him on the bench. "I thought these might make your day a little better," she said, her tone kind and encouraging. The man's gaze lingered on the card. He opened it cautiously and read the short message she had written. His lips trembled, and he blinked rapidly as if holding back tears. You didn't have to do this," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's been so long since someone showed me kindness." Emma sat down on the bench beside him, leaving a respectful distance. "I just wanted to help," she said softly. "It's Christmas, and no one should feel alone today." The man exhaled deeply, holding the warm cup in both hands. After a moment of silence, he spoke, his voice carrying a quiet sorrow. "I just wanted to feel part of a family again, even for a little while." Emma's heart ached for him. After a brief pause, she said, "You don't have to be alone tonight. Why not come to my place? I'd love the company." The man looked at her, his expression a mix of surprise and doubt. "You've already done so much." "I don't want to impose," he said softly. "You're not imposing," Emma said firmly. "Please, it would mean a lot to me too. Christmas is better when it's shared." He stared at her for a moment, his eyes glistening. Finally, he gave a small nod. As they stepped into Emma's small apartment, she welcomed him warmly, holding the door open with a reassuring smile. The space was humble but inviting, radiating a quiet charm. Though the furniture was mismatched and showed signs of wear, a couch with frayed edges, a coffee table bearing faint scuff marks, everything was neatly arranged and spotlessly clean. It was evident that Emma took pride in creating a cozy, comfortable home despite her modest means. In the corners stood a small Christmas tree, decorated with a few well-worn ornaments. A single string of lights blinked unevenly, casting a soft glow. The elderly man paused near the tree, his gaze lingering on it. One of the lights had slipped from a branch hanging loosely. He reached out and gently adjusted it, tucking it back into place. The tree looked a little brighter now, and a faint smile crossed his face. Emma noticed him by the tree and smiled. She gestured toward the couch. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll get us something to eat. Won't take long." The elderly man nodded and sank into the worn armchair near the tree. As Emma disappeared into the small kitchen, humming softly as she worked, his eyes wandered the room. A stack of papers on a side table caught his attention. He hesitated, then picked one up. It was a utility bill, stamped with the words, "Past due," in bold red letters. Beneath it were more envelopes, each bearing similar notices, the amounts owed scrawled in pen on the corners. His hands trembled slightly as he set the bills back down. He glanced toward the kitchen, where Emma was humming softly as she prepared the meal. She moved efficiently, dividing portions of what appeared to be leftover ingredients into small containers before setting aside just enough for their meal. It was a simple act, but it spoke volumes. Every ounce of food was carefully accounted for, a testament to her frugality and struggle. The elderly man leaned back in the chair, his thoughts churning. This young woman, despite facing such obvious hardships, had extended kindness to him without hesitation. She had spent her own money to bring him a meal and welcomed him into her home, asking for nothing in return. His heart ached, filled with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. When Emma returned with 2 steaming bowls of tomato soup and 2 small plates of sweet potato casserole, she handed him a bowl with a warm smile. "Here we go. It's not fancy, but it's warm and hearty, and a little festive," she said, sitting down across from him. The elderly man accepted the bowl with a grateful nod, his hands trembling slightly as his eyes flicked to the golden-brown topping on the casserole. "You've done so much for me already," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine how I could ever repay you." "You don't have to," Emma replied, her tone gentle but firm. "Kindness doesn't need repayment. It's just how the world should be." The elderly man stared at her, his eyes glistening once more. For the first time in a long while, he felt the true spirit of Christmas, not in material gifts or grand gestures, but in the quiet generosity of a stranger who had given him something far more valuable. As they ate in silence for a few moments, the warmth of the meal seemed to settle between them. The elderly man glanced at Emma, his brow furrowed with thought. He had noticed the overdue bills earlier, and couldn't ignore the signs of struggles surrounding her modest, yet tidy apartment. Setting his spoon down gently, he broke the silence. "You've been so kind," he said softly, "but it seems like things have been hard for you." Emma hesitated, her gaze dropping to the casserole dish between them. For a moment she seemed torn, as though reluctant to burden him with her struggles. Finally, she exhaled and gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "I don't usually talk about it," she admitted. "I don't want anyone to think I'm making excuses or seeking pity." The elderly man shook his head gently. "Sometimes sharing can lighten the load, even just a little. I won't judge Emma. You've already done so much for me." Encouraged by his sincerity, Emma finally spoke, though her words came hesitantly as she explained her situation. She had been working at a large company where the workload was overwhelming, and employees were often overworked without proper recognition. When she raised concerns about the unfair treatment and questioned some of the company's practices, she hoped for positive change. Instead, she was fired abruptly. To make matters worse, the company refused to pay her the salary she was owed. With no other option, Emma had been living off her savings while taking small freelance jobs online to cover basic necessities. Despite her best efforts, finding stable work had been a challenge, and every day was a struggle to stay afloat. The elderly man's expressions softened with empathy as he listened. After a moment, he said gently, "You've endured so much, yet you still have the strength to help others. Don't lose hope." Emma nodded faintly, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I thought about fighting back," she said softly, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "But I just couldn't handle it with everything else I'm dealing with. I'm already struggling every day. I'm just hoping a new job will help things get back to normal." The elderly man looked at Emma, his expression thoughtful, yet resolute. For a moment, it seemed like he wanted to say something but held back. Instead, he simply smiled warmly and said, "You've done more for me today than I could ever repay. Just remember, Emma, sometimes help comes when you least expect it." Emma tilted her head slightly, confused by his words, but too tired to question them. She gave him a faint smile, assuming his remark was just a gesture of gratitude. Their conversation gradually shifted to lighter topics, filling the room with a quiet sense of ease. Before long, the elderly man stood up, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He thanked her warmly one last time before excusing himself for the evening. With a soft, thoughtful smile, he stepped out into the stillness of the night, leaving Emma to reflect on the unexpected bond they had formed. An hour later, Emma was seated at her desk, immersed in her freelance work. The apartment was silent save for the occasional click of her keyboard. She hoped that this project might bring her closer to some much-needed stability, but her focus was broken by a sudden knock at the door. Startled, she glanced at the clock. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Unease crept in as she stood, hesitating for a moment before cautiously opening the door. When she opened it, she froze. Standing there were 4 impeccably dressed lawyers, their expressions warm yet serious. Behind them stood the elderly man from earlier, his familiar kind smile now tinged with quiet determination. In his hands, he held an envelope wrapped in decorative paper. "Good evening, Emma," he said gently. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to see you again." Emma blinked in confusion, her gaze shifting between him and the lawyers. "What's going on?" she asked softly. The elder man stepped forward and handed her the envelope. "This is for you," he said. "You showed me kindness when I needed it most, and now it's my turn." Emma stared at the envelope, her hands trembling. "I don't understand," she murmured. "You don't have to do this. I didn't help you to get something in return." "I know," he said with a small, knowing smile. "That's what makes you deserving of it. Please, open it." Hesitating, Emma slowly opened the envelope. Her breath caught as she saw the contents, a staggering sum of money enough to ease every burden she had been carrying. She looked up at him, her voice breaking. I can't accept this. It's too much." The elderly man shook his head gently. "This isn't just about money," he said, his tone steady. "I know about your struggles, the withheld pay, the battles you fought on your own." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the group of lawyers behind him. "These are my team, top lawyers from my firm. They will take on your case and ensure you get what you're owed. You won't have to fight alone anymore." Emma stared at him, her mind racing. The realization struck her like a wave. This man, who had seemed so vulnerable just hours earlier, was the owner of a prestigious law firm. His quiet strength and influence were far beyond what she had assumed. She turned to the lawyers, their calm, professional demeanor, filling her with a tentative sense of relief, as if her burdens were already beginning to lift. A few months later, Emma stood outside the courthouse, clutching the final documents from her case. She had won, and the company had been forced to pay her every penny they owed. Relief washed over her, but it wasn't just the victory that brought her peace. It was the support of the man who had stepped into her life on Christmas night. He had kept his promise, and with his help, Emma's life had taken a turn she never expected. Her struggle was over, and she couldn't help but feel a deep gratitude for the stranger who had turned her world around. As she looked back at him, she realized that the kindness she had shown him had been the spark that changed everything. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and share it with your loved ones to spread kindness today. And if you want more inspiring stories like this, hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your support helps us create more amazing content. Stay with us for more heartfelt journeys. Click on the videos on your screen to explore more stories that will lift your spirits and brighten your day.